Hey everyone, and welcome to the Modern Musician Survival Guide podcast. This is the first podcast episode where we have a guest, and I'm really excited to have Matthew Shlomowitz, a London-based composer, as the first guest on the podcast. We have known each other since 2016, I think, almost 10 years now. We worked together on a piece that he generously wrote for me, and it's a really great piece. He is an amazing composer. He wrote for ensembles from all over the world. His pieces were performed in different festivals in Europe, in Australia, in the US, and so on. He's also a professor at the University of Southampton. And I'm really excited to be talking to you today, Matthew. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for that very generous introduction, and I'm looking forward.
Yeah, so to kick off this conversation, do you remember the moment when you were drawn to music and when you discovered that you actually wanted to become a musician and deepen that aspect of your life?
I don't think I can give you a day where I dawned on me, but I can think of a few moments. Definitely, if I can begin in a silly way, realizing I was pretty terrible at sport. Short was surely one reason that I became interested in other things as an Australian kid. I started playing in bands, like rock bands, as a drummer and keyboardist when I was 12, 13. I got really into that. And then was just like listening to music obsessively, Pink Floyd or The Cure or whatever. And then I did have a kind of, I went to a different school for my final year of school, and like a music specialist school, and had just a really inspiring music teacher in the kind of cliched romantic way, but it really did work on me, where I really had never listened to any classical music when I was 16, and then this one year we did this course and we studied 12 pieces together with the class over the year, and she was fantastic and very quite dramatic. She would turn the lights off and have us lie down on the floor and listen to Shostakovich Fifth Symphony and stuff like that, and I got really into it.
Yeah, it speaks a lot to the importance of education, right? In public schools, and getting to discover also things that maybe you wouldn't have discovered otherwise. And what do you think was that pull towards, sports on the one hand, but there's surely a lot you could have done, and also perhaps why not go into like rock and pop music and instead pivoting into this direction?
That's a very good question. I never really thought about it. Maybe it's to do with, it's probably different now. I went to university in 1992, and you couldn't do anything at university in 1992 in music that wasn't classical music. That's what, maybe jazz was happening in Australia a bit, but really that was the option. At my own university now, we have lots of the majority of our incoming students are heavy metal kids or pop and jazz or music theatre. We do classical, but it's really not the dominating at all. So maybe that's really the answer, just that if you went to university to study music, you were studying classical music. But that sounds like I didn't want it. I also, as I say, in this last year, I was totally convinced by it and I was excited by it. So that's what I wanted to do as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that sometimes we have this pull towards something that's completely unexplainable, is just there and, interests us and pulls us in entirely. And, listening to your pieces, I remember I was listening when I was in Tel Aviv, when we actually met at the festival, Tzlil Meutkan. I was listening to your lecture about bad music, or a lecture on bad music, and I found it really different from everything else I have heard up to that point, and I didn't really know your works. At that time, I was playing with my professor, Krasimir Shteref, one of your latter pieces, and it was lots of fun. It also left a lot of creative space to the performer. For those of you listeners who don't know the latter pieces, this series, check them out. There's quite a few recordings, I think, on YouTube now. And they're also really fun to perform and also to watch and to listen to. And I remember that, there was something there that was, for me, brand new, that I was discovering. And it was a mix. It wasn't trying to be different, but at the same time it kind of was. And I think this transitions a bit into what I wanted to talk to you about. And it's this paper you wrote for the publication of short music on Darmstädter neue Musikferienkurse, which, I bought this collection of, I don't know how to call them, lectures, presentations. And I didn't know that you wrote for that particular one, and I was pleasantly surprised to read it. And I found it fascinating. The title was, "It's not about you, do we still need an artistic voice?" And in an environment where we are so focused on, and everyone tells you need to have your unique voice, you need to be recognizable, you need to be original, and so on and so forth. I really like the way you put the different perspectives on that as to, okay, clearly it can be something positive, but at the same time it's limiting. How do you see your creative output in this sort of duality between, okay, I am the kid who was playing in rock bands and I was interested in that, but then I studied classical music and now I write this type of music?
So lots to say there. I want to go back and just say, first of all, that yes, I remember very well meeting you in Tel Aviv and still have a very strong memory of you playing. I'm pretty sure it was a piece by Magnus Lindberg, right? A solo piece.
Yes.
By memory, and I think with your eyes closed, much of the performance with a great intensity, and I was very impressed. And then you mentioned letter pieces and the lecture about bad music, and maybe that's a good way to come to the question, because I think yes, to say I'm not against an artistic voice or being consistent, but I'm not like that, and I think our new music scene overly privileges or wants people who are like that, and I disagree. So just to say, first of all, it's not adversarial. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying we should remove artistic voice or people who are consistent are bad. That would be silly. But I just don't think that's the only way of doing things. So I've always, I think, get very excited by a certain project like the letter pieces, which, as you just sort of briefly described, were pieces where musicians had to do physical, theatrical aspects. It was a particular project that I was obsessed with for a few years. And then later I got really obsessed with making lecture pieces, which, like the one you saw about bad music, exploring a kind of aesthetic question. In this case, not really bad music, but more like what's going on when we make aesthetic judgments. And I really enjoyed reading that literature in philosophy, culture studies, music, aesthetics, etc. And then thinking about how I could sort of, in a kind of humorous, entertaining way, provocative way, sort of repackage it into an art piece. It's somewhere between art and a pedagogic lecture. So that's sort of the background, that I think I'm just simply a person who works in phases. For 5 years, I'm totally hot for something, and then one day I wake up and it's the last thing I want to do ever again, and I have to look for something else. So in the article, I really wanted to explore, just pose the question, like, is this, and I try and make all the best arguments for why being consistent is good and why being inconsistent might be bad, but equally the opposite. But I think ultimately what I'm really trying to argue in the paper, and it really comes from my experience as a teacher, is that when we are composing a piece and we come across an idea for the piece, we shouldn't ask ourselves, is this the sort of thing I would do in my pieces? I think that's not a good question. I think that the question we should ask ourselves is, what's best for this piece? And that can take you to some more interesting places, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I really like a lot this argument of, as a performer sometimes, and I'm struggling with this, I really enjoy playing lots of different things. But at the same time, I've had conversations with people, especially, let's say, the more kind of mainstream classical music industry people, who are saying, okay, that's really cool that you really love a lot of those things, but it's not clear what you're doing, And I feel that there's a risk of kind of labeling oneself. And perhaps in a way, it resonated in this article that you wrote. You gave an example of a composer that wouldn't adventure into experimenting with form simply because it's not something that they would do. and perhaps they lose a lot, or perhaps not. Maybe it would be a better piece, or maybe not, but we would never know if they don't experiment with that. So I really found this this aspect very, very curious and also resonating with me in this kind of sense. What do you think about this? Yeah, in a way, labeling and maybe signaling to the, let's say, outer world and to the listeners what I am doing and what is my voice, basically.
Yes, I think I realized after I wrote that paper that it obviously doesn't just relate to composers, it relates to performers, and actually just relates to people. My oldest daughter is at university studying psychology, and I think I'm sure it's all pretty basic for her. But this idea of our sense of self isn't just something in art. Of course, it's also how we conduct ourselves in the world or think about ourselves in the world. And I think the other thing I don't think you use the word, but this word, maybe brand, is in the background of what your question is, right? I think, and then maybe I'm just going to sort of collect my thoughts, and that's one of the, and then maybe something else I would add is just like, I come across composers and especially performers, I think, who are often confronted with a question like, should I take this work that I'm offered that's not really something I believe in, or but and of course people have to make a living, but I'm wondering, Ghenadie, what this question means for you, and whether whether you've had experiences being confronted with, let's say, work opportunities, or here's two examples: an opportunity that is something that you don't really believe in artistically, but of course one has to make a living. But my second example is maybe taking on a piece, and you've wondered, there's a piece that interests you to do, but you wonder if it really fits with the kind of profile you're trying to develop. How have you thought about that?
Well, the second question is definitely something I have really thought a lot about. And the first question, I believe that many times I was at a point that I needed to decide, for whatever reason, financial, networking reasons, whether to take on a project that I didn't believe in. And many times I said yes. And of course, now I'm in a position where I can decline those kinds of things. Then the question becomes, why do I decline? What is the criteria? And it's kind of like a medal, or a coin. It has two faces. So if I'm saying yes to something, I'm saying no immediately to something else at the same time. So if I'm saying no to this, what am I saying yes to? And in my case now, I think I identified some of the criteria upon which I base my decisions, and that's whether a project gives me an energy or drains me. So maybe in your words, whether it excites me or it doesn't, because if it doesn't excite me, then maybe I can do also something else that actually brings more joy to me. Then, of course, one can consider financial reasons. There's also like that aspect there. And I think it's very personal, and one can decide why to take on a project or not. I was in a workshop, and the person that was giving the workshop, a cellist, she was saying, well, if you accept a project, 2 of the 3 criteria must be present there. So one is financial, one is how much you like the project, repertoire, basically, and the third one was prestige. So if you're playing for, I don't know, for the king of England and you don't get paid or whatever, like, is it a repertoire that you want to play? And in that setting, then 2 out of 3, okay, fine. And the second question about a piece. Yes, in my student years, I performed quite a lot of music that I didn't believe in, but at the same time, I wanted more experience. And at one point, one of my composer friends called me jokingly I apologize to the listeners, the whore of composers because I was asking everyone to write stuff for me. And at the time, it seemed right. Nowadays, I think I'm more intentional with choosing composers who I work with. And if there's a piece that I really believe in, I will definitely make everything possible to have not only the first performance, but also the second, third, fourth, fifth, and so on. Because I believe, and you can confirm this, like in new music settings, at least in my experience, the first performance is always rather easy. Well, not always, but rather easy to get because it's a premiere, it's a huge event. The second and the third, not really that easy to get there.
Was it your teacher, Ghenadie, who had this different criteria, the 3 criteria?
No, it was a person who I did a workshop with. It was on concert acquisition. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that sounds like really good advice. I'm sure there's more to it than those 3 criteria, but as a way of thinking through it, it sounds like a good. It's good to know why you're saying yes and thinking through it. Now, yeah, I really know what you mean about extra performances, and that's something I'm also part of an ensemble called Plus Minus Ensemble. So both with the ensemble and with myself as a composer, you know, I try and spend time. I'm spending lots of time trying to get concerts, and so I know exactly what you're describing there. And I think, you know, part of the deal with the new music scene is to accept that you're going to scrounge around a lot, trying to make opportunities, and there's a lot of effort. But you know, I really, with my own pieces, for instance, I think it's like you have to kind of like be an agent for your own pieces, and like it's such a pleasure when pieces really enter the repertoire or get played again. And so rather than just moving on to the next piece, which of course is sort of artistically what I'm interested in, I really am trying to make myself spend more time looking after the old ones too. Yeah, I mean, as a teacher, I talk about this with my composition students all the time. It's easy to say, but of course the big thing to have is to have a thick skin. You know, I think it's really fine to always put yourself out there and to tell people about what you're doing, but you should always do it without any expectations. People have lots of priorities, and some people will like what you do, some people won't like what you do, and that's just life. Never take it too personal. So yeah, but you know, I often think it's you get into music when you're a teenager, to go back to where we started, because you just love music and you love making it, but you don't really know about the roller coaster life you're signing yourself up for, with the good news, the bad news all the time. You know,
yeah,
I'm envious of my friends who have more conventional jobs and can just enjoy their weekly life without the ups and downs. Of course, the ups and downs are a buzz as well. So it's yeah, pros and cons to that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was reading a book called Courage to be Disliked in December, and some ideas there I found quite interesting and also quite pertinent to the life of a musician. And one of those was to be kind of course, truly free and truly happy. One must be fine with being disliked by other people. At the same time, it's about understanding like what are our life goals and understanding what's under our control. So if my goal is, how can I put it, for other people to like me, that's not my goal, because as hard as I will try, maybe someone will not like me, and I failed there, but that's not my task. My task is to try and bring as much truth to my art and what I feel is there and wants to come out and needs to come out. And the rest is not, it's not my task. And also because, if we were in this for, I don't know, getting rich or getting a lot of money, I believe there are much easier jobs to do and less stressful jobs to become more wealthy in a way.
I mean, I'm curious to know more about that book you've been reading. That sounds really interesting. I agree with lots of that. The only thing I say is, of course, it's also true that if a festival director or a fantastic musician like yourself approaches you, it's if it's someone like a director who is programming stuff you think is really fantastic, it is so much it's a big buzz when they commission you. Then you're really, and then there's other directors who don't respect nearly as much. Then the commission doesn't give you the same pleasure as well. Of course, the opportunity gives you the same pleasure, but the actual invitation, this moment is one of the nicest moments when someone you really respect, as I say, a performer, a curator, comes to you. So I think I'd add that caveat. And the other way it also goes the other way. When someone asks you for a piece and they've not even heard your music, it happens such a zero pleasure,
Yeah.
So it's I think I like your thesis, but I don't think it's quite complete. I think we should also acknowledge that there are some people in the world whose appreciation we very much do desire.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not saying that, we don't have that moments when we're like, oh my God, that's, it happened, that moment. Yeah, but at the same time, I believe every one of us was confronted with the situation where you really want that person to either write for you or to play your music, and the feeling is simply just not there, and it's human. It's it can happen. And there's nothing you can do about it, So, yeah, but on the other side, of course, if that person comes to you and says, I really enjoy your work, would you write something for me? I mean, that's, I think on both sides, if that happens, like, in a mutual way, that's really amazing. And to go back to your pieces, because you're also someone who, at least you also mentioned that on your website, you wrote in pieces in series. And as you mentioned previously, you have this thing that you're into something for a period of time, and then you switch and you're into something else for a period of time. And you wrote a series of letter pieces, and I would really love to talk about that, and also about the performance pieces. And then, what are you into at the moment? What are you excited about? So let's start with the letter pieces.
So I would say, I think the first letter piece is from 2008, and I would say it was part of something in the sense that there was a bunch of composers. I'm thinking of people like Alexander Schubert, Simon St. Anderson, Jennifer Walsh, Jesse Marino, Natasha Dills, James Saunders. I'll stop name dropping now. But a lot of people around this moment who were thinking about music performance in a kind of expanded way. I think that's Marco Ciccioliani's term, music in the expanded field. Joanna Bailey did a fantastic festival in Spore in Denmark called Music Plus around this time. So people just thinking about what it meant to make a piece for a musician that wasn't, you didn't just think this person plays the violin, but it's a person who might have some other skills. You find out they're a great whistler or a dancer, or the piece is somehow for them as a full person. And people doing things with lighting and lots of all these people I named were doing things in different ways, of course. But that's one aspect. And by the way, just to say that way of thinking, I think, of course, has its many historical path. From anyone like Cargill would be the almost obvious example, but also like a piece like Tom Johnson's Failings for double bass, fantastic piece from the 70s. So it's not that this wasn't happening before, but it was really on the edge, very marginal, and all of a sudden it became kind of dominant, or it was a weird moment in 2012 in London where you couldn't go to a concert and see musicians dancing or something. So it became really like mainstreamed within the scene. And then the second thing about letter pieces is what you referred to, about the kind of openness or the creativity that the pieces give to the performers. So I would call that like the tradition of open scores, which again has a long tradition from the 50s with Feldman and Cage, Bisotti, lots of people, Pauline Oliveros, but again was kind of on the edge of the scene for 50 years. But somehow I think in the last 20 years has become far more prevalent as a much more kind of majority concern. And so these letter pieces really do sort of intersect these two traditions. That is to say that they're open scores, they're pieces which have an enormous amount of creativity or creative decision making that they ask of the performers, and I'll just say something about that in a second. And they also involve musicians doing physical actions as well as making sounds. The basic idea of the pieces, the reason they're called letter pieces, is because the scores are just letters, which are organized in a sequence, and the musicians are asked to create the sounds and actions that each letter symbolizes. So if you see any given piece performed twice, it's going to sound and look completely different, but the structure of the piece will be exactly the same. Sort of hard to say more about it just like this without showing a video or something, but I think that's the basic gist.
Sure, and I encourage the listeners and viewers to check them out on YouTube. There's lots of different performances of letter pieces, and yeah. And what about? I think I'm very curious, about this aspect that you're talking about performance, because it really took on, I think, quite an important role in the past 10, 15 years, at least from what I saw. Also, for accordion, for example, there's a lot of pieces written also with physical performance and the use of the voice. And Andreas Borgor is someone who is doing a lot of work in that field. I think he did his doctoral thesis on that aspect. So, yeah. And about your performance pieces?
So, yes, I think I wrote 4 or maybe 5 of them. So the first one was this lecture about bad music, and then the one that we made together, which is called Freedoms for Notes and Men. That so just to say, the one that we made together was all people and philosophers, cultural theorists have often wondered or speculated or proposed that a given political or economic system might be mirrored in the musical logic of the time. The novel Dr. Faustus by Thomas Mann rehearses a lot of these arguments within a fictional setting, but there's also kind of academic literature on it. Most famously, maybe from Jacques Attali's book Noise: A Political Economy of Music, which is a kind of Marxist take on this. And I mean, from my perspective, I think it's like the most interesting thought imaginable, like a totally interesting thought. And there's something true about it. But as soon as you start to actually apply it, it quickly becomes completely ridiculous. So it's both somehow really true and really stupid at the same time to me. And a good example would be like, is 12-tone music of Schoenberg, is this one argument that this is communist? This represents communism because all the notes are equal. But from another perspective, it's fascist because all the notes are controlled by this system. So it's very slippery, and it really does get silly very quickly. But nonetheless, I still take it seriously as a way of thinking. That there is simply a connection. There surely must be some kind of connection between the musical ways of structuring and the ways that other things are structured in their time. So we made a playful piece, I would say, exploring this, which I think is, I hope is like, the word educational is a bit heavy-handed, but something like, I hope that the piece is rich in content and stimulating and provocative.
Absolutely.
But I also think it should be a funny piece. Like to me, it's a funny idea, that this could be true.
It's a lot of fun to perform, and also every single time I play it or I perform it, the response from the audience is very positive. It's thought-provoking. There's lots of moments where they also like laugh or smile, but at the same time, I see in some bits that they're, thinking about the content present in the piece. So yeah, it has been really great, and thanks again for writing that for me.
It was a great pleasure. And so just to say that the other pieces, one was about bad music, which, as I said, really is about aesthetic judgment. There was one on sad music, as in how is it that this inanimate thing called sound presented by musicians can elicit such strong emotional responses from people? What's going on there? And there's an enormous philosophical literature on that question. And then one on listening to music. What's going on? What are the different ways that we listen? But I just found it it's a format that I came across in much more in a dance context, with people like Xavier Leroy, Jerome Bell, doing these pieces, which were somewhere in this, for me, very interesting place between a pedagogical lecture and an art piece. And I like the fact that the pieces are strange for people because they're not quite sure how to take them. And the pieces maybe are also about sort of positivistic claims. Like if you read literature on bad music, they'll say people will get bored at this point, and you just think, is that true? So it's fun to test those theories out on an audience, and then sort of provoke them by saying, this is where you got bored. Yeah.
I really love the fact that you're researching into all of these ideas, that you're reading or finding out about, and just like, okay, let's apply it and see how sound translates into this, and whether it's kind of like, let's test this theory, like between like theoretical physicists and practical physicists. So we're like, okay, let's take this theory and apply it and see what happens. I really love that aspect of your music.
Thank you.
What about now? What excites you now? What are you working on today?
Yes, so I have really taken a different direction again the last maybe 4 or 5 years. I'm still really excited by it, but I simply know from past experience that will probably stop one morning. But I've been working on various projects, but I suppose most importantly, a series called Explorations in Polysonality and Other Musical Wonders. These are series of pieces which I guess you could call suites, lots of little movements, really thinking about a lot of neoclassical techniques and principles, and trying to think about whether there's trying to find new ways to do things with techniques, textures, approaches to composing, which I think are largely like out of circulation within new music. But polysonality itself is my favorite. That's my has been my biggest interest the last few years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that you actually finished also like the Freedom for Notes and Men with a polytonal musical element there.
That must have been the start of it. I should also say the last few years I've been co-composing for the first time. I've done a bunch of projects with other composers.
Okay.
So the two big ones. I made an hour-long piece with Jennifer Walsh for Ensemble Nickel called Minor Characters, which is a kind of music show, a theatre show. And then with the turntablist composer Mariam Rezai, who's in Newcastle in England, we made a piece for turntables and orchestra. And we're going to make another piece together now. So that's, I must say, as something maybe connected to the voice thing, is also just like being absolutely a middle-aged person. I'm a bit bored of myself. And so finding it very exciting to get some fresh energy from working with other people.
Mm-hmm. May I ask you, how does it work? Because I remember at the Bludenz Tage Zeitgemäßer Musik, I think it was like 2 years ago here in Austria in Bludenz, at the festival, Clara Janota programmed a piece that was performed by Ensemble Face. And basically the piece was co-composed by the different students in her composition class in Vienna. I think it were like 5 or 7 different composers who wrote the piece. Yep. And it was very interesting because it was impossible to kind of pin down the different elements or the different movements or whatever it was, the different characteristics of the piece to a single composer. And it sounded organic, it sounded consistent. I believe they had also a set of rules that they needed to respect in order for that to work, because otherwise it would be just like a collage of different musical ideas. And yeah, for those of us who don't know about this co-composing process, how does it work? What's your experience in it?
That's super interesting to hear about that project with Clara's class. I'd love to find out more about that. That sounds quite different because you've got so many composers, whereas mine was just were 2. And I don't think I have a really exciting answer to your question. But I think there's 2 things to say. The first is that in terms of making the material, it was pretty simple and pretty independent. I would send something to Jenny and she would add her part, or vice versa. And the same thing would happen to Mariam. I would write something for orchestra and send her the MIDI file, and then she would add her part on top of it. And it was just a great surprise to find out what that would be. But, she could send me back something with just someone screaming, a record, someone screaming that she was scratching over. I had no idea that's what it would be. And that was great. So that on the one hand, we never made things together in the room in either case. We just, one of us would do something and the other one, but we would always leave space for the other person to add something and then have the great pleasure of finding out what that would be. But the second part you mentioned a bit was about structure. That's for sure the hard part to work together. And I think with Marianne, we made a piece called Six Scenes for Turntables and Orchestra, and by keeping each scene to sort of 3 minutes long, you do actually largely avoid the structural problem. The structure by each one is just sort of a thing, and then it's finished, and you go on to the next one. The piece with Jenny was more complicated because it was an hour long, so we did have a lot of walks together, sort of just nutting out the form of it together. Yeah, but still then ultimately making the material just quite independently.
Great. I think that gives also like extra impulses, right? Because it's at that point it's kind of like a dialogue, because you do something, then you get an input which might bring you in a completely different direction, and that might be completely unpredictable. And at that point it's creating this newness that you're also writing about in the article. Because I was thinking when I was in Darmstadt, or 2016 was, I remember that at some point a lot of the pieces sounded kind of the same. I don't want to say that they were the same, but the aesthetics there was okay. You could hear that that's the Darmstadt way of writing, or the Darmstadt way of composing. And I can completely understand and see the value in trying to belong to a certain current, let's say, in the culture, or in music writing, or in performance. But at the same time, it's this risk-taking aspect that sometimes is missing, and maybe is not bringing you towards more interesting places and towards this newness.
Yeah, I must say, when I was at Darmstadt 7 years after you in 23, it was pretty diverse, pretty pluralistic. So I wonder, I'm not doubting you, but I wonder if it's changed. And I had the strong sense leaving that festival that it's just so interesting now. Like I do feel quite post-style, in the sense that I feel very open to enjoying things from lots of different places in the scene. But you just sort of notice that within in all of these places, you've got some very, very brilliant, imaginative people, and you've got lots of people who sort of follow them, who do it, and that's some. So it's much more interesting to find the really interesting ones in each bit for me, rather than think I'm committed to one of these particular threads.
Before wrapping up the conversation with a quick fire round of 5 short questions. One question to you, Matthew, after all of this exploring, and also because like the article in this book with the different presentations from Darmstadt, I felt your inquiry very personal. And at one point you also write that it was in a way a sort of personal struggle, because it wasn't clear how to get a voice, or whether one needed a voice. Today, do you think you have a voice, an artistic voice, that's very kind of clear and pinpointed?
I'm not going to answer that question, because I don't want to think about it. I don't want to think about it.
That's a good answer.
I don't know. It's just not productive. I'm obviously not. I'm not against self-introspection in general. I'm all for it. But on this particular question, I don't want to think about it. Just because I think. Yeah.
No, it makes absolute sense. So let's go to the quick fire round. So the first question: what's one belief about being a musician you had to unlearn?
I just have nothing coming to my head. I'm paralyzed because I'm supposed to think quickly, and it just made me think nothing.
Or maybe what's one of those myths that everyone thinks about musicians, and you also thought, but then you saw like, no, the reality is different.
But give me some examples of myths, and I'll tell you if I agree with them or not.
Hard work, for example. If you work hard enough, if you go to all of his workshops, if you like accept everything.
That's a very That's a really good question. I love the hard work one because, I believe in hard work almost always, but it is also interesting that sometimes simply people, I have spent a year working on a piece and it was terrible. I worked my ass off. And I know other people who have written a piece in a day and it's fantastic. So the hard work one is a very interesting one, I think, because it's generally true, but definitely not always.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's something
Great.
about doing things quickly, which also gives you have courage. The longer you think about something, I think the more you often doubt yourself. So it's an interesting question I think about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely true. The more you doubt yourself, the more you get in your own way of getting.
There's a famous experiment. They say if you're asked what your chances of getting the basketball in the hoop are from 4 meters, you might say I've got a 40% chance. But if you leave the person there for 5 minutes and ask them again, they say 15% chance.
Yeah, I feel that's true with most of my decisions, especially when picking up the phone and maybe like calling someone to pitch a concert or anything. Like, okay, I'm gonna do it the night before. Okay, tomorrow I wake up, I drink my coffee, and I'm gonna do it. The morning arrives, I drink my coffee, and like, maybe I'll send an email.
Yeah,
So great.
exactly.
So the second question: what's the best career advice you've ever received?
That's such a good question again. I should have an answer to that. What is the best?
If you want, I can ask you the third one, which is like, what's the worst career advice, and when we can extrapolate the best one.
I don't know if anyone is also. I don't know if my composition teachers ever gave me career advice. I'll tell you the funniest advice I ever got given. I was taken for a composition lesson as a student, like a 19-year-old in Australia, to a pub, and my teacher was betting on the horses the whole time, barely talking about. We didn't talk about music at all until the end of the hour. He said to me, Shlom, composing's just like the horse races. Always leave something for the last straight. So that's not career advice, but it's artistic advice. I'm not sure if that's a very good answer to your question, but I can't think of it.
No, that's really cool answer. I just don't know really where to put it, but let's put it into the funniest career advice that you received.
Yes, let's do that.
Great. So the next question is, what's one mistake you see young musicians repeating, or maybe young composers in your field?
I'm not sure if this is exactly what you mean, but I am, obviously I feel so empathetic to how difficult it is for young people. But nonetheless, I'm often disappointed when I go to shows by composers and performers who I just don't think have put the work in. And I really get that they've probably got two jobs and stuff. And like, I know it's not easy, but if you're going to get on stage and you're trying to do something for yourself, I just don't think people should do it unless they do it really the best they can. So my advice is don't do it unless you can do it the best you can.
That's great advice. And I think that's something that more of us should be doing. So the last question, what's one habit that keeps you consistent?
You mean as a composer or like eating porridge in the morning?
Well, I mean, we can do as a composer and also as a person. We can do a double answer.
Okay, well, I have porridge and coffee every morning. That's definitely, and I compose in the mornings. I'm quite a habitual composer. I really like to compose before, up until lunch, and then I spend the rest of the day doing other things. Yeah, I want to go I'm sort of half answering this, but I'm combining your questions. My other best advice, I think, is get help from people. Like I have a bunch of people in my life, other composers, and we give each other composition lessons all the time. I have some really good friends who I show every draft I ever write, get feedback. My daughters see my pieces. I get feedback. I just think there's a kind of romantic nonsense that we're supposed to be special and do it all yourself. And I just think that's not the prize. The prize is to make great stuff. And if you can get help to do it, then do that. So my big advice actually is to get help from people and give help to people. That's it.
I think that's such a perfect way finish off our conversation. And I think that's amazing and really great advice and really undervalued, because you receive a lot of value from asking help from people and getting feedback from people instead of trying to kind of grind it on your own and get everything done on your own and by yourself. And Matthew, thanks really a lot for this super interesting and inspiring conversation. Where can people find you? Not as in your address, but where can they find you online?
Well, I have a website with my surname is pretty unusual. So there's only one Matthew Shlomowitz in the world, so they'll find me pretty easily. And physically, they'll find me in London. So
Great,
a pleasure to chat with you today. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Thank you. And I hope to meet again with you soon in person and catch up on the past 10 years, but we haven't seen each other. Great, Matthew. Thanks again.
My pleasure. Have you got any plans to come to London?
I'm working on it. Not sure when, but hopefully this year, at the end of the year.
Oh,
I'll let you know.
Well, if you please let me know. I'd love for you to come for dinner and meet my family.
That would be great.
Yeah. Look, thanks again. I really did enjoy the chat, and thanks for having me. Really, I'll look forward to diving into the podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode. Make sure to like, subscribe, rate, and comment this episode. Subscribe to the podcast and send in questions or topics that you would like to hear about on the next episode. Thank you for your attention and see you in the next episode.